Ancient humans had more free time than you do. That is not a metaphor or romanticization. Researchers who have studied the few remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, groups who live in almost exactly the same way our ancestors did for hundreds of thousands of years, found that the average person worked between 3 and 5 hours a day to meet all of their survival needs. 3 to 5 hours. And then they stopped. And then they did whatever they wanted. Meanwhile, the average person in a modern industrialized country works 8, 9, 10 hours a day, arrives home exhausted, and still feels behind. We built farming, we built cities, we built electricity and medicine and the internet and overnight delivery. And somehow, across all of that progress, we ended up with less time, not more. So, what were they actually doing with those hours? Not the survival hours, the other ones. The long, quiet, uncategorized stretch of each day when no predator was chasing them and no mammoth needed hunting. What filled that time? What did it feel like? And what does the answer tell us about the parts of yourself you have been quietly starving? The answer is stranger than anyone told you it would be. If you want more content that changes the way you see the world, subscribe to Yverse. We do this every week. To understand ancient human time, you first have to understand what ancient human actually means on the scale of our species. Homo sapiens has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Agriculture, the thing that created the concept of a job, of daily scheduled labor, of showing up somewhere and doing a task in exchange for survival, is about 12,000 years old. That means that for over 95% of human existence, no one had a job, no one had a boss, no one had a to-do list or a performance review or a quarterly target. Think of it this way. If you compressed all of human history into a single 24-hour day, agriculture would appear at 11:02 at night. The Industrial Revolution, the thing that gave most of us the 8-hour workday, would appear at 11:58. The smartphone would arrive with roughly 30 seconds left on the clock. Everything we think of as normal life, everything we assume is simply the way humans are supposed to live, fits into the final 2 minutes of a very long film. For the other 23 hours and 58 minutes, humans were hunter-gatherers. Small bands, no permanent settlements, moving across landscapes, taking what they needed, and stopping when they had enough. The anthropologist Marshall Salins called this the original affluent society. Not rich in things, but rich in time. The idea sounds absurd when you first hear it. These were people with no hospitals, no safe food supply, no protection from drought or predator or illness. How could they possibly be considered affluent? Because affluence is not about how much you have. It is about how much of your life you spend wanting things you do not have. By that measure, they were extraordinarily free. But that is only the surface, because the deeper you go into this, the stranger it gets. Most people assume that ancient humans without the structure of work would have spent their days in a state of anxious survival, always scanning for threats, always hungry, always one bad season away from extinction. The popular image is grim and exhausting. Club-carrying, cave-dwelling, perpetually terrified. The easy answer is that free time barely existed, and when it did, it was spent resting because survival was simply that hard. Researchers discovered otherwise. When anthropologists began studying living hunter-gatherer groups in the 20th century, the Kungsan of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Matu of Australia, they found something that refused to fit the expected story. These groups were not spending their days in frantic search for food. The Kungsan were studied by Richard Lee in the 1960s, and he found that adults were working an average of around 15 hours per week to feed themselves and their families. The rest of the time was genuinely, structurally unscheduled. And what did they do with it? They talked. Enormous amounts of talking. Researchers who tracked time use found that conversation was the single largest activity of the unscheduled day. Storytelling, gossip, debate, laughter, speculation about what happened yesterday and what might happen tomorrow. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar built an entire theory around this, that language itself may have evolved not to coordinate hunts, but to maintain the social bonds of large groups. That talking was, in a very real sense, the work. They played. Adults played, not children at supervised intervals. Adults playing games and teasing each other and engaging in what researchers neutrally term social play, meaning playful interaction between grown humans, which modern societies tend to regard with deep suspicion unless it is packaged and monetized as a team-building exercise. They made things, not because they were ordered to, not in exchange for anything. They made things because they wanted to, and because making things is something the human nervous system finds deeply satisfying when nobody is telling it to. Which raises a question that most researchers were not prepared for. But here is where everything gets complicated. Stop. Because what comes next contradicts what most people believe about art, creativity, and what human beings are fundamentally for. The oldest known musical instrument is a flute carved from a vulture bone. It is at least 40,000 years old. The oldest known cave paintings, the ones at Chauvet in France, are around 36,000 years old. The oldest known jewelry, beads strung together from shells, dates back more than 130,000 years. 130,000 years. This was 118,000 years before agriculture, before any concept of a job, before anyone was paid for anything or required to produce anything. And yet, someone sat down, drilled holes through tiny shells, and made something beautiful for no survival reason whatsoever. This is the detail that genuinely disturbed researchers when they first began to confront it, because it means that art is not a byproduct of civilization. Art did not emerge because humans got organized enough to have leisure time. Art came first. Art is what humans did when they had time that belonged entirely to them. Art is, in some sense, the original human activity. The cave paintings at Chauvet were not decorative. They were not instructions. They were not records. They were created deep inside caves that required torchlight and significant effort to reach. Nobody would have seen them by accident. They were made by people who went out of their way, into the dark, to make something that was never going to benefit them materially. And this reconnects directly to the central question. Because if you ask what ancient humans did all day, the answer is not merely that they rested and talked and played. The answer is that they made things and told stories for their own sake, not as productivity, not as economic activity, but as a fundamental expression of being alive. And here is what almost no one talks about. We know a remarkable amount about ancient human leisure because of death, specifically because of what people chose to bury with other people. When a community buries one of its members with objects, with shells, with ochre, with tools or flowers or food, those objects tell us what that person valued, what they wanted to take with them, what the living thought mattered enough to give away forever. The San and Hadza cave burial in Iraq, discovered in 1960, showed what appeared to be a Neanderthal buried with flowers. The interpretation has been debated since, but what is indisputable is that Neanderthals, not even our direct species, but our closest relatives, were burying their dead with intention, with apparent ritual, with what looks very much like grief and ceremony. This was happening at least 60,000 years ago. Ritual is organized time. Ceremony is structured attention. The existence of burial practices means that ancient humans were not simply filling blank hours randomly. They were organizing time around meaning, around what mattered, around the people they had lost and the stories they told about where those people had gone. The next part took scientists decades to accept. Music was not entertainment. Music was technology. Researchers studying synchronized movement, the way humans and only humans can move in rhythm with external sound, found that coordinated singing and drumming changed group behavior in measurable ways. It reduced conflict. It increased cooperation. It created what the psychologist Robin Dunbar called a chemical bond between people, a literal neurological change produced by making music together, flooding the brain with the same endorphins released by physical touch. Fire, which ancient humans controlled for at least 400,000 years, extended the day. It gave people hours of warmth and light that no other animal had. And those hours, researchers found, were used overwhelmingly for one thing: storytelling. Firelight conversation was qualitatively different from daytime conversation, more emotional, more personal, more likely to involve stories about people, relationships, and the invisible forces that governed life. Ancient humans, sitting around a fire 200,000 years before anyone invented a job, were doing what you do when you watch a film, or listen to a podcast, or lie awake talking with someone you love. They were trying to understand a world they could not fully see. They were making it bearable by sharing it. But none of that fully answers the original question. The real answer is both simpler and far more unsettling. What did ancient humans do all day before jobs existed? They did exactly what you do when no one is requiring anything of you. They did the things that felt worth doing for no reason except that they felt worth doing. They talked because talking is how humans process reality, not as idle chit-chat, but as cognitive work, as the mechanism by which experience becomes meaning. They played because play is how mammals of all kinds calibrate social bonds and rehearse scenarios that have not happened yet. They made art because making things is what a brain with excess capacity and opposable thumbs naturally does when it is left alone with materials and time. They cared for each other. The archaeological record contains unmistakable evidence of individuals who survived severe disability, broken bones that healed, conditions that would have made independent survival impossible, meaning that other people fed them, carried them, stayed with them. This was not an economic transaction. There was no surplus to trade. Caring for the helpless was simply what they did, and they sat by the fire. They looked at the dark and told each other what they thought was out there. Remember that image, a person drilling holes through shells 130,000 years ago, making something no one asked for. That image looks different now. It is not a curiosity from a primitive past. It is a portrait of a human being expressing something so fundamental that it preceded language, preceded agriculture, preceded every institution we have ever built. It is someone saying, with their hands, "This is what I think is beautiful. This is what I am here to make." The strange truth is not that ancient humans had so little. The strange truth is that, stripped of everything we have added since, what remained was still deeply, recognizably human. Here is what this means for you specifically. You contain 300,000 years of a particular kind of human. The version of you that existed before anyone told you what your time was for, before productivity became a virtue, and busyness became a status signal, and the inability to rest became something people listed, slightly proudly, among their defining characteristics. That earlier version of you did not ask whether something was worth doing in economic terms. It asked whether it felt true, whether it created connection, whether it was the kind of thing a person would remember or tell someone else, or bury alongside someone they loved. When you feel the pull toward making something that no one asked for, toward a conversation that has no agenda, toward a story that has no point except that it draws you in, that is not inefficiency. That is not distraction. That is the oldest part of you recognizing the thing it was built to do. The question is not really what ancient humans did with all that time. The question is what you would do if the hours truly belonged to you. And what does your answer tell you about the distance between the life you are living and the one you were built for? If that question unsettles you in the right way, why versus where we keep asking it. Subscribe, and we will keep going deeper together.